Welcome to the Nightly 5 podcast with Belle Taylor.
On today's show, a shocking new revelation about the double murder in a Perth suburb. A former Australian Army general calls for a return to compulsory conscription. Broadcaster Lisa Wilkinson reveals her eye-watering claim for legal costs after successfully defending herself against a defamation suit brought by Bruce Lehrmann. Why aren't baby boomers spending all their money? Economists are left puzzled as to why the luckiest generation is hoarding their cash. And box office blues. A less than stellar opening weekend for Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, has pundits yet again declaring the death of cinema. In our top story today, the daughter of the Perth gunman was on the phone to him at the time of the killing.
A mother and her teenage daughter have been shot and killed in Perth by a man hunting his ex-wife. Police say he used cable ties to restrain the women before taking his own life.
The daughter of the gunman who shot and killed a mother and daughter inside their Perth home was on the phone to her father in the seconds before he pulled the trigger. The daughter heard someone scream, "Put the gun down," and several gunshots before the call was disconnected. Jennifer and Gretel Petelchik were murdered in their own home by 63-year-old Mark Bombara after he turned up at their house on Friday afternoon looking for his ex-wife. Bombara's ex-wife was good friends with Jennifer and had been staying with the Petelchik family since leaving her husband a few weeks ago. Bombara's daughter immediately phoned police after the call with her dad was disconnected and told them what she had heard. Officers arrived on the scene so quickly that when they got there, they heard at least one gunshot, believed to have been the shot Bombara inflicted on himself after murdering Jennifer and Gretel.
Unless there is some kind of profound threat against Australia, I see it very difficult to see a national service model coming back. But I think, the least we can do is be prepared for it. I mean, otherwise we're going to be surprised. And frankly, we'll probably be just as bad, if not worse, than the Russians in September 2022.
Those are the words of retired Australian Army Major General Mick Ryan. He's speaking on his podcast, Burke and Ryan, which looks at national security and modern conflict. Ryan believes we need to bring back national service, claiming that the current all-voluntary model of service is inadequate to deter Chinese aggression. Joining me now is the other host of that podcast, Latika Burke. Latika, thanks for joining me today. Do you think conscription in Australia is something even remotely possible in 2024?
Not in 2024, but I do think a debate about it is something that is possible. And actually what I said in that podcast, and I strongly believe, is that if this were to ever have any traction in Australian society, which I believe if you went to the public right now and said, do you support some form of national service, most people would probably say no. If we were to be in a situation where we needed national service and had to get that through to the community, we would need to do that on a bipartisan basis. There is absolutely no way in the current climate that if you just had, say, for instance, the coalition, which is not their policy at the moment, proposing or supporting this, and you had a position where the Labor Party said, no way, Jose, which is their policy at the moment, it would be like the Republic or the Voice referendum. You just wouldn't see support across the community. So I don't think that this is something that will be supported today, right here now, tomorrow. But in the future, if things were to deteriorate in the geopolitical situation further, which is very likely and most experts believe will happen, I do think there could be a time where we see a conversation at least open up about it.
You do this podcast on modern conflict. I don't think you need to be a military strategist to do a couple of sums on the back of an envelope and look at a country like China that has a population of 1.4 billion people, with Australia at about 26 million people. And a lot of people are going to say, why would we mobilise our people? Surely if we're going to be talking to China, the way to do it isn't boots on the ground. The way to do it is talking and figuring out some other way.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody wants to see that sort of situation. That would literally be worst case scenario. And the point that Mick Ryan, who is a military strategist, unlike you and me, is that he makes the point that if we show strength now, you avoid that whole situation, because the whole point of deterrence is not to build yourself up to a position where you want to go to war, but it's preparing yourself to say, look, don't even try us. We're ready. And the cost of you attempting something is actually such a risk and is so great to you that it's not worth you trying. You just stay in your lane, we'll stay in ours. That's the whole point of the comments he is making.
Yeah.
He does not say that we need some form of national service because we're about to go to war. That's absolutely not what he's saying. What he is saying is that at the moment, the armed forces is shrinking. We're struggling to retain and recruit people. And by the way, this is not an Australia-only problem. This is hugely reflective of debates in modern society in France, across Europe, in the UK where I live. This is the exact same debate that's taking place. And some of those countries actually have gone on to reintroduce or introduce or expand existing national service schemes. So, for example, in Denmark, they've just opened it up to be gender neutral, which means women will now be asked to come and train.
Yeah, Denmark have had national service for a long time, and so have many countries in Europe.
Right.
But you just mentioned the UK there, and UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has announced that he will bring back national service for 18-year-olds if re-elected. Why is that? You're in the UK. Why is this idea suddenly in vogue over there?
Look, the broader conscription debate has been bubbling away pretty much since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, because that war has not been nipped in the bud as early as people might have liked, or as people who could have made a difference behaved in a way that could have stopped that war in its first year. Instead, it's dragged on, and now we're seeing a long war in continental Europe. And Russia has really re-geared its entire society, including through mobilization, but also economically, to sustain that war long term. So now you're seeing various leaders in Europe say, oh, hang on, this war could easily come at us. And the starting point for that are some of those former Soviet-occupied countries like Estonia, Lithuania. And those countries are the ones that have national service because they have never seen the threats to them go away. Now, Australia is a very isolated country and doesn't think conflict's going to come to it. But it very well could, because we're in a very, very fragile situation. And so in Europe, this conversation has been bubbling along, and now it's been taken up by the UK. But personally, I think this is an election stunt, and I think it's been misfired, and I think it's a big mistake from Rishi Sunak to lob this out in an election campaign, because if you really were serious about the need for this, you would do it in a way that was divorced from an election campaign. You would depoliticize it, and you would actually go to everybody in the society at the civic level, amongst your political opponents. You'd go to the military and say, how do we make the case all together for what we now deem is such a critical, pressing need that we can now go to the community and say, look, we need you to buy in on this a little bit more.
You certainly can't imagine it being particularly popular with, parents of teenagers who might have to do this, or people who've just turned 18, that, it's not going to be something that those people would probably be putting their hands up for.
Well, actually, it is fairly popular amongst adults, and you can kind of see where that might kick in. There's a bit of, these kids today, They don't know what...
Okay, maybe I'm projecting there. I don't know what the UK's like.
The older you get, the more they support it. And don't forget that, they do have a continental war in Europe in their generational memory. Yeah. And of course, Australians went to fight to support Europe as well. But obviously, it's a lot closer to home in Britain. And as someone who lives in Britain, they talk about the war all the time. Okay. It ran right through their pandemic response. We're the country that beat continental Europe at its own game here. We can do anything if we just believe in ourselves. So there is a bit of I think sometimes misguided British boosterism in the society. And that does reflect, I think, here where you do see strong support for this in older generations. Younger generations, I actually think there might be an opportunity for them to buy in, because this is not completely about military service. If you look very closely at some of these schemes, it can involve, for example, weekend service, like delivering medicines to people who can't go and get them themselves. It might involve things like joining the emergency services. So in Australia, that could be like the SES, or helping learn how to fight bushfires, or clean up after floods. And actually, if you saw during the pandemic, when the country was in crisis, a lot of people did actually want to help. And that same sentiment exists in Britain. I think it is current in Australia. And I do think you would see a lot of people go, yeah, I could probably give something to my community if I was shown the way that I could do it and be helpful and not be wasting anyone's time. So I'm not sure that the door is entirely closed for younger generations either.
Okay, this is really interesting thoughts. Thank you so much, Latika. And We look forward to chatting to you again soon.
It's my pleasure.
High-profile presenter Lisa Wilkinson is seeking $1.8 million in costs from Network 10 for her successful defence in the Bruce Lehrmann defamation trial. The project host and Network 10's lawyers have returned to court today to determine how costs should be split. She's demanding 10 pays her costs after she chose to hire her own representation.
Lisa Wilkinson is seeking $1.8 million in legal costs from her employer, Channel 10, following rapist Bruce Lehrmann's failed defamation suit against her and the media company. In a case management hearing at the Federal Court in Sydney, it was revealed the cost may have exceeded $10 million. Some of Australia's biggest legal names worked on the case, such as high-profile defamation expert Sue Crisantho, who represented Wilkinson. Lehrmann brought the defamation suit after the project reported the former political staffer Brittany Higgins had been raped by a colleague in the office of her former boss, then Defence Minister Linda Reynolds, in 2019. He was not named in the story, but he claimed he was identifiable. After a 24-day civil trial, Justice Michael Lee found that on the balance of probabilities, Lehrmann was a rapist. Later, Justice Lee ordered Lehrmann to pay the legal fees of Channel 10 and Wilkinson.
Money, money, money.
Baby boomers, the generation born between 1946 and 1964, are considered one of the luckiest groups in history. They grew up during strong economic growth, and while they might not all be rich, as an aggregate they've amassed great wealth. Around a quarter of the Australian population are boomers, but collectively they hold 53% of our national wealth. So why then, as they enter their golden years, are they not spending any of their money? Economists have long predicted a boomer-led spending spree as the lucky generation hit retirement, but that does not seem to be happening. Boomers are being accused of being stingy. They are not spending their money as predicted. Instead, they are trying to preserve or even increase it. This has led some economists to say that the issue for the economy in the 2020s and 2030s will not be why boomers are spending so much as anticipated. It will be why they are spending so little. Joining me now is the Nightly's personal finance expert and certified baby boomer, Nick Bruning. Nick!
Yes, I'm proudly taking the tag of being a boomer.
You are. We're going to blame you.
Well, let me tell you, old habits die hard, and I think that's part of the problem here. What we've got to remember is that a lot of the boomers, their parents were very much brought up through World War II and beyond. And that was a time of, off the back of the Great Depression. I know we're going back nearly 100 years, but those habits that they learnt from their parents have been passed on very much to their baby boomer kids. So I can myself remember growing up in the 60s and 70s when money was tight. And so we made do with what we had, and we were very, very careful. And I think, as I say, I think that continues on through life. Those old habits stay with you. It wasn't until the mid-70s that the money became much more free. That's when we introduced the bank card. It's the predecessor to all those plastic things we have in our wallets and purses these days.
Well, these days we just tap a phone.
Well, exactly. And that's part of the issue is that, in my time when I was growing up, you would go to the bank and borrow money. Now they sell it to you, Bill. So,
yeah.
It's the availability of credit and the availability of funds, I think, that's contributed to perhaps a different mindset in the younger generation that when you want it, you just go and get it. The notion of saving up for something is pretty much gone.
That's all very well, Nick, but you can't take it with you. Like, this is the time to spend
it. Well,
that's
what I was about to say. There's also a situation where we've got a lot of people, the boomers, inheriting significant wealth from their parents. So, they might have bought a 3x2 in a working suburb like Subiaco back then for, £5,000. Well, of course, a place in Subiaco is now worth millions of dollars, or any of those sorts of working type suburbs surrounding all of the Australian cities have got them. So we're talking millions of intergenerational wealth being inherited. And I think to some boomers, there's a sense that they also want to lead that on to the next generation as well. So you do find that they are generous, but it's not necessarily in spending it on themselves. I know a lot of people that have helped their kids out with a mortgage, and I'm sure Bill's probably hoping her mum and dad are listening to this. Where they'll they'll be there to sort of back up, again, for sensible things. You find that the boomers aren't inclined to give kids money just to go and splash on trips and waste it, if you like. But if it's on something sensible like paying it off the mortgage or reducing debt, those sorts of things, many times you'll see that the boomer parents will help out the young ones. But beyond that, it's still a case of leaving some sort of foundation estate, call it what you like, for their kids and grandkids and beyond that, in fact, yeah.
Look, I don't mean to be rude here, Nick, but do you think...
No, be as rude as you like, but I'll throw it right back at you.
Look, do you think... Look, I'm an elder millennial. I believe that's what my title is.
Yeah.
Do boomers think they're going to live forever? Is that part of the problem?
There's a little bit of that, and I think that they are aware that life expectancies are growing on, and there's a sense of making sure that there's enough that they don't want to be a burden on their kids. So they absolutely keep funds there for things like aged care, whether it's going into an aged care facility, and even medications these days. I mean, we live in a fantastic country where we've got the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, where most of our life-saving medicines and stuff cost the boomers $7.70 a prescription. But in other countries, of course, it's vastly different where they're paying thousands of dollars for some of these medications. But that said, certainly health costs and things like that is a factor in them wanting to preserve the money. I don't think it's about thinking for a moment they're going to live forever, but it certainly is about making sure that they're not a burden on their kids and grandkids and being comfortable. I think, most boomers will spend reasonable sums on themselves. I don't think, when they travel, most of the people I look after tend to fly, premium economy or something like that, rather than sitting down the back.
Premium economy.
Yeah.
They control 53% of the nation's wealth.
Yes,
Tell them to splash out on business class.
There's still a little bit. Don't forget. They have I know they're regarded as stingy, but let's just call it thrift, Bill. Thrift, they're going to be
spend not want not money. Better fly premium economy.
Well, that's right, and you're talking to someone that doesn't buy anything from Coles unless it's got a yellow sticker on it.
Oh, well, that's just sensible. Look, you touched on this before. There are reports estimating that there's going to be around 3.5 trillion in assets transferred in Australia by 2050. That's sort of between the boomer generation to sort of younger generations. What kind of impact is that going to have on our economy?
Well, it's significant, and putting my economist hat on, I know that one of the thoughts out there at the moment is that as that money starts to come into the system, and we've got this sort of disproportion between young people, a birth rate, all those sorts of issues become a factor when we've got an older and ageing population. So things like services and stuff will be in greater demand. So carers, those sorts of things. And there's absolutely a thought out there that we'll see some increase in wage pressure as the number of people available to deliver those services is reduced, relatively speaking. So we could see some wage pressure, and that could in turn fuel inflation and interest rates. So, I mean, that's the bad side of things if they start spending the money. But at the moment, it's not happening, is it?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of inspired. And I think it's caught a few economists out, to be honest, Bill. I think a lot of people thought they would be spending it, but it might very well be the next generation, dare I say it, which haven't had the influences of post-World War II thrift, where that money was reasonably freely available. As I mentioned before, the availability of credit sort of turned things around a little bit. So what we might see is that when my money eventually gets left to my kids and grandkids, that they will be the ones that tend to spend it.
They're just going to
all
blow
those
it.
Fun sorts of things.
They're going to blow it on caviar and champagne. all the boomers' hard-earned money just gone in a generation.
Stop it. You're giving us nightmares. No.
So that bumper sticker, that spending the kids' inheritance bumper sticker you see on the caravans around, that's just a lie. We need to redo it, don't we?
It just doesn't happen. It's really interesting when we deal with people with money at retirement. So one of the things we speak about is work out your end plan. Is your end plan to spend the last dollar on the last day? Well, good luck to that. My best one is that you end up owing the bank $10,000 when you peg out. But beyond that, what most people will tell us is that they'd rather do what they want to do in retirement and then leave what's left for their kids. But interestingly enough, as you watch their investments going up and down, when they have a down period, perhaps when there's a bit of a market crash and they're sort of behind the what they started with, they don't spend. They just simply don't spend. What they only spend is the profit. So when you get a run on the share market, they've made a few dollars. That's when they'll take out the profit and spend it on the big holiday. But you would be amazed how many people start retirement with a particular sum of money at, say, 65. And that's what they die with, exactly the same amount or very close to it. It's quite extraordinary how that happens.
Yeah, well, if you're listening and you're retired, go out, treat yourself to a fancy lunch.
Yes,
Is
right.
that the message today? Just be like,
Yeah, it is.
I'm
Look,
doing it for the economy.
Look,
More champagne.
Exactly, you're helping everyone. But look, I think it is a mindset thing, and I think it is important that boomers that are in a position where they do have some money, remember that, as you've said, you can't take it with you. It's about balance. It's about understanding too that as you get older, into the latter years of retirement, some of the things that you might be putting off to do later, you just physically can't do. I use the line, things wear out and bits drop off. And they do. By the time you get into your late 70s and 80s, you're physically not able to do many of the things that you might be able to do
and
in your 60s.
You can have all the money in the world. Sometimes you can't replace
Exactly.
those bits.
And you know, Bill, I know a lot of people that are literally getting more money in now, which they can't spend. They literally can't spend. They don't
what
have the
a
physical
problem to
ability
have,
spend
Nick.
it. Well, it is, and it does become an issue, and so that's why, I'm very much in the camp that says spend it while you can, because you never know what's around the corner.
That's right. Thanks so much for joining me today, Nick. That's been
Pleasure.
great.
As a child, my world was forever changed. My mother was magnificent. And he took it all from me.
It's been hotly anticipated by fans of the Mad Max franchise, but Furiosa, the blockbuster film starring Chris Hemsworth and Anya Taylor-Joy, has had a less than explosive opening weekend at the box office. In the US, Furiosa has pulled in just $31 million in its opening weekend. That's a lot less than the predicted $40 to $45 million they were hoping for. It's led to a lot of hand-wringing in Hollywood. Why aren't people going to the cinema anymore? Joining me today is the Nightly's culture editor, Wenli Ma. Wenli, are people no longer going to see films on the big screen?
They still are. I just don't think they're going in as many big numbers. We saw with COVID lockdowns in 2020 and 2021, cinemas were shut often for months at a time, and it's been really hard to get people to go back. It was a very slow return, especially among an older demographic, and certainly last year there were some huge breakouts like Oppenheimer and Barbie, but on the whole it is still more depressed than it used to be, which is a real shame for Mad Max Furiosa, because it is absolutely a movie made to be seen on the big screen. It's the visuals, it's the sound. Like, you're not going to get even close to the same experience at home, let alone on a phone. So it's a shame that people aren't turning out, but maybe they will. I do know that in Australia it made 3.3 million Australian dollars at the box office, which is not amazing, but it's not a disaster as such. But seemingly a lot of the anecdotes out of the US is that the audience is still very, very male dominated, and it seems like women are not turning up to see Furiosa, even though the lead character is a woman.
Do you think, can we blame Hollywood a little bit here? Because, as much as we love Mad Max, it's a film from the 80s originally, right? And so some of these, it seems like every day there's another sort of nostalgic remake. And what went really well last year, as you said, was Oppenheimer, which is a new film, and Barbie, which was a new film. It wasn't a remake. Does Hollywood need to come up with some new ideas?
They absolutely need to come up with new ideas, but we've also seen that 80s nostalgia totally works. I mean, Maverick, Top Gun Maverick made like $1.4 billion, and that was a movie that no one had really tried to do again for over 30 years. And there's a lot more coming this year as well, including new sequels to, like Gladiator and The Crow and Beetlejuice. So they're definitely really going back into the archives. I'm not sure if Mad Max Furiosa, what it was that in particular that kept people away, but it's certainly not alone in the box office at the moment. The Fall Guy, which is that big Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt action comedy, which I loved, I thought it was such a fun time, has not done very well at all, especially in the US. It's actually done pretty well in Australia, because I think partly it was filmed in Sydney, so certainly people on the East Coast were keen to check it out. And also Ryan Gosling is coming off, a lot of Barbie goodwill after an incredible promotional campaign for basically a year for the cult of Ryan Gosling. But I think people just kind of don't necessarily go to see movies for movie stars, whereas a movie like the fourth installment in the Planet of the Apes franchise has made actually quite a bit of money despite having really no stars in it.
There's really no accounting for taste. Are people waiting for movies to come out on streaming services? Is that the issue?
I think that is partly it. I think people got so used to seeing big new releases with like big movie stars like, Chris Evans and The Rock just go straight to streaming that the behavior has shifted. I mean, it was already happening before COVID, but COVID certainly accelerated the trend. And there's a lot of stuff that you can't put back in the bottle, or the toothpaste you can't put back in the tube. For example, there are big release movies that do come to at-home viewing much sooner than they used to, even though you can't just fire up Netflix or Disney and it's just there within 3 weeks or 4 weeks. You can maybe rent it at home or buy it at home for $30, which is still cheaper than 2 movie tickets. Personally, I still don't think you can ever replicate that experience, but some cost of living, I can understand why people might not want to pay $80 for 2 tickets and some popcorn at the movies.
Yeah, absolutely. Although you're right, there's nothing quite like going into a cinema and seeing something on a big screen, especially one of those big, action movies, isn't there? It's a real kind of special experience. And I think it's one of those things that when you actually go do it, after not doing it for a long time, you think, this is it. This is the business.
This is what a lot of people were saying last year when they went to see Barbie and Oppenheimer, and often both, is they're like, I've really missed this. This is really fun, this communal experience, this collective sharing of storytelling that you get to laugh together, you get to cry together. And also, I think very importantly, you are not allowed to look at your phone. So if you're watching a movie at home, unless you've got that phone locked up in another room, it's all too tempting to go and grab it.
Oh, that's so true. It's having like 5 screens in front of you at all times, isn't it? Whereas maybe we just need to get rid of the 5 tiny screens, 1 giant screen.
One giant screen.
Just my theory on to stop myself looking at my phone is watching films with subtitles, because then you've got to put your phone down then. You're stuck watching the film, reading it.
Yeah, this is actually another pet peeve of mine is I can't understand why people watch things with subtitles if it's the right, if it's like an English language.
Oh, no.
Project, and they're watching.
I'm talking non-English. I'm talking non-English language stuff. I'm not insane.
It is much more popular than it used to be, and actually some of the stats do bear out that definitely younger generations are watching things with captions on. So it is interesting, and there's actually, I believe, a court case going on in Victoria where some hard of hearing activists are suing, I think it was Hoyts, to ensure that 100% of public cinema sessions will be captioned.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah. At least the kids are reading, huh?
At least the kids are reading.
Thanks so much for joining me today, Wenley. Have a great day.
Thank you.
And that's all for today's show. Thanks so much for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can join Ben O'Shea tomorrow on The Nightly 5.
The Nightly 5 podcast is brought to you by 7 West Media. For all these stories and more, head to thenightly.com.au, helping you get in front of tomorrow.